I get to heaven, all I want to do is get there. Anybody feel like me? All I want to do is get there. I'm not trying to figure out what color my mansion gonna be. Some of you already said, Lord, I want it to be turquoise in the front row because you know I don't like pink. And Lord, if it could have this because you know I don't like that. And if it could be by the water, it would be nice, Lord. And I'd like a patio and all of this here. Your perspective is wrong. I know the Bible said mansion and I'm looking forward to it. But if it's a hut and it's in heaven, if it's just a little shack, but it's in the heaven. If I got a blanket on the side of the road, but it's in heaven, I'll be satisfied. Because I just believe a hut in heaven ain't like a hut in earth. I believe a shack in heaven ain't like a shack on earth. Anybody feel like that with me? But they wanted to know who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And in order to illustrate his point to them that he would meet, he brought in a child. Set this child in the midst of where they were. And I can imagine, because these disciples often felt territorial. There's many parts of the scripture they tried to keep people away from Jesus. When they thought the wrong folk were coming in, they said, ho, what you doing? They tried to, they thought everybody didn't belong with him. They thought everybody shouldn't get up close to him. They thought, it was only certain people that should have direct access to him. That kind of sound familiar, don't it? They thought it was just certain groups that should be really close and should be touching him. But often Jesus got among the people. Jesus moved among the crowd. And even when the disciples was trying to hold them back, he said, let them come. And even when it came down to the children, he said, don't hold the children back, but let them come unto me. But here it is, he's sitting this child in the midst of the disciples. And he's responding to their question of who will be the greatest. He's responding to their inquiry of the succession in heaven. He brings the child in and he says, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted. Somebody say converted. In our effort to become humble, to retain humility, there has to be a conversion. That's the first thing. There has to be a conversion. Somebody say it has to be a conversion. And the reason there has to be a conversion, because in our natural state, we're not humbled naturally. Remember the exercise we did before? Y'all remember what I said? If it was right, y'all was going to respond. Oh, okay, I'm just making sure. But if we're going to be humble, there has to be a conversion. Because in our state, in our natural state, we are naturally worldly pride filled. We are naturally filled with a pride. We naturally put ourselves before others. In our natural state, we come first. In your natural state is, hey man, I got to survive, and whatever I got to do to survive, that's what I'm going to do. And if it means walking over you, well then you're going to be a casualty. If it means stepping over you, then that just means you're going to have some footprints in your back. That's how we think naturally. When we're born into the world, that's how all of us think. Nobody is exempt from that. Now there may be certain degrees. Some people may be worse than others at that. But we all come into the world with that way of thinking. So he says, except ye be what? What the word say? We got our word open. Is it still open? Let me check the rows. Is the word still open? He says, except ye be what? Thank you, baby Val. Except ye be converted. Somebody say converted. That means there has to be a change in who you are. There has to be a change in your mind. There has to be a change in your reasoning, because if you remain the same, you're not going to be humble. So he says, if you're desiring to be humble, if you're desiring humility, he said there must be a conversion first. There has to be a change. And I know I got some biology students in here. Isn't there something called a conversion chart? Am I right? Now y'all know it's been a long time since I was in school. Help me now. There's a conversion chart, right? Somebody tell me, what is this conversion chart about? Huh? No, am I wrong? There's no well, give me biology. What's that? Huh? It converts metals. Is that right? Yeah. What's that chart? What they call it? A periodic table, right? And it talks about the elements, right? Talk to me here. What is that? What that table tell you about the elements? Huh? What about the elements? Okay, all right. I want all of y'all to bring me your biology grades and chemistry and all of that, and we gonna do some stuff, because y'all can't help me, I can't help y'all. The blind lead the blind, we all gonna fall in the ditch. But in order for there to be some real difference, there has to be a conversion. You have to go from one form to the other form. You have to go from one state to the other state. Come on, what is that? Okay then, thank you, help me. You gotta change it, you know, and that's how we have to be. If we're gonna be who God called us and to be humble, there has to be a change. Whether it's mathematical or biological or chemical, there has to be a change. Because in our normal, natural state, we're puffed up, all of us. That's why we don't pray and come to church often and read the word often. That thing will rise up in us. That pride will rise up in us. You know, who you think you're talking to? That's pride, man. You know, who you think you talking to me? You must forgot who you are. That's pride. You can't talk to me like that. You can't say that to me. Now we think we're somebody. You can't look at me like that. That's that thing rising up in us. And if we don't be converted and do those things that lend to conversion, we won't be humble. He said, except you be converted, and then once you converted, your conversion is going to take on a form. Your conversion is going to take on a personification. He's not physically telling us to become like a child, but he's telling us to take on the personification of a child. He says, except you be converted and become as little children, you ain't even got to worry about your rank in heaven. You ain't even got to worry about where you going to sit in heaven. He said you won't even make it to heaven. Is that what it said right there? He said, and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Next verse. Whoso therefore shall humble himself as this little child. So there has to be a conversion. Is that right? Have to do it. There has to be a change in our minds, and we become as little children as we won't enter. The next verse says, who therefore shall humble himself. Somebody say humble himself. You know, when I was growing up, they used to tell me, you need to humble yourself before God humbles you. Anybody ever heard somebody say that? They say you ought to humble yourself, because if you don't humble yourself, God has a way of humbling us. Oh, yes, he does too. He has a way of bringing us down off that high horse. Oh, God got a way of making us realize who we really are. And I'd rather take the task of trying to humble myself than to have God to have to humble me. Because when God does it, oh, it could come in many ways. It could come in many ways. Sometimes that's why we lose things that we have. Sometimes that's why we lose people, because we've been too lifted in ourselves. And God has to bring us to a point of reality. So sometimes he has to shake some stuff up in our lives. Got to cut some stuff off, because we get a little beside ourselves in thinking who we are, what I've done, how I've achieved. And God said, if you continue in that mindset, you'll never be able to work for me. You'll never be able to truly be successful. So what I got to do, I got to bring you down a bit. And who knows, don't you know, when you lose some stuff, that makes you recalculate life. When you lose your job, lose your house, lose your family, that makes you begin to recalculate some things and to look over some things and to say, God, what's really going on? That's what it should do. Because sometimes God is trying to get our attention. He's trying to get us to understand some stuff. God is trying to get us to know that we are nothing outside of him. We can do nothing without